Hello friends, welcome back. So today is the second lecture on introduction to air pollution. In first lecture we discussed about kind of history of air pollution, how it was evolved and what are the major sources, then pre-industrial era, pro-industrial era and then its negative impacts, all those things we discussed. So today we will continue and we will see how this Earth's atmosphere really participate in dispersion of air pollution, what is their significance, then what is basically unpolluted air in the atmosphere, how do we come in comparing the polluted and unpolluted air, then different scales of the air pollution, local, regional, continental, those kind of things we will discuss today, and different types of the pollutants we will see, and the role of the atmosphere in source and sink relationship, okay, source and then where it is sinking or absorbed, that kind of thing, and then we will conclude. So, when we talk about the this biosphere and the environment, so basically the biosphere is nothing but a narrow zone of the earth where this lithosphere, hydrosphere and atmosphere, they interact with each other to support the life. So, you can see the biosphere is combination of these three, lithosphere like this earth crust etc., and the hydrosphere sea and the water cycle, atmosphere related to air. So, all these three in combine or collectively they support the life. So, this is known as the biosphere. When we talk about different components of the biosphere like atmosphere, so this is basically the gaseous layers and it can be divided into different layers like troposphere, the lowest layer near the earth planet, then the stratosphere, then mesosphere, okay, thermosphere, exosphere and those kind of things. Okay. When we talk about the hydrosphere, then it is the collection of water over and beneath the earth surface. So, basically aquifers etc., are the part of this hydrosphere and the sea, river, all lakes etc. When we talk about lithosphere, so this is nothing but the outer solid part of the earth including the crust and uppermost mantle. So, you can see this particular layer which is known as the lithosphere. So, they really support the life because of their wonderful integration with each other. When we talk about how this atmosphere came into existence, so the scientific theory is like the hot gases surrounding the earth about 4.6 million years ago. This was completely the sphere of the gas, you can say, and the portion of hot gases cooled and condensed to form the oceans, and then the secondary atmosphere evolved. So, gases released during like outgassing or volcanic eruptions. So, the release of like nitrogen, CO2, methane and sulfur dioxide, those kind of gases got released in the secondary atmosphere. Then the modern atmosphere which we know today, like the constituents of the nitrogen, oxygen etc. So, that is basically the accumulation of oxygen and the forms of life as observed today. Otherwise, initially scientists say that the total environment was anaerobic kind of and anaerobic means because oxygen was not present at the initial stage, the anaerobic conditions were there, but later on the aerobic conditions occurred, oxygen came into existence, and then this primarily oxygen and nitrogen is the part of modern atmosphere. So, that is the atmosphere which is supporting our life, which is the aerobic life, you can say, oxygen based life. So, you can see with these stages. So, this is primordial earth and then volcanic eruptions, CO2, nitrogen, those kind of thing, then precipitation, condensation, okay, and then photosynthesis. So, this H2O, CO2, O2, all these things. So, life started to come into existence. So, CO2 absorption and CO2 was used, and then the release of oxygen and CO2 came into balance, and this modern atmosphere was formed in that way. When we talk about different layers of the atmosphere, so basically like the uppermost layer is the exosphere, and that is it blends the outer space, you can say, and it reaches to an altitude of around 3000 kilometers. So, that is like spaceships cross that particular height. Otherwise, for us as an environmental engineer, or when we talk about life, so we talk about only the lowest layer, that is the troposphere. Okay, when we talk about the second highest layer, that is thermosphere, which is located around 80, 90 to 800 kilometer. Okay, and the temperature increases in this particular layer from minus 86.5 to 1200 degrees Celsius. That is very huge increase of the temperature is there at that altitude. Mesosphere, it is the midway of the layer, and this is around 40, 50 to 80 to 90 kilometer, around 85 kilometer you can say up to that, and the temperature is around minus 2.5 to minus 86.6 degrees Celsius. Okay, so temperature decreases in that way. In stratosphere, temperature increases from minus 56.5 to minus 2.5 degree Celsius, and the height is 11 to 50 kilometer, that kind of thing. And the lowest the layer is the troposphere, where life is there and where we really interact with the atmosphere through whether aircrafts or our all activities happen in this troposphere, and that is around around 12 to 18 kilometer height up to from surface, and all these activities happen. So that is why we environmental engineers mostly relate ourselves to the troposphere, and we concentrate only to this particular layer. When we talk about temperature and the pressure with respect to the altitude, so the temperature decreases with the height in troposphere, and then for certain height it remains constant, and then in stratosphere it increases again, and then it decreases in the mesosphere, in thermosphere it increases again. So that kind of linear decrease or increase of the temperature occurs in different layers, and there are reasons. You should try to find out what are the reasons why the temperature is decreasing in the troposphere with respect to the height, why it is increasing with respect to height in stratosphere, then again decreasing. All these, there are interesting reasons. I request you to go through those reasons. We will discuss those later on also. Well, when we talk about pressure, then pressure decreases exponentially. You can see its way of decrease. So when we talk about air pollution, so naturally we also think about what is the unpolluted air, because when we are talking about polluted air, that means there is also air which is unpolluted. But basically it is very almost impossible to find the unpolluted air, because when the atmosphere was not filled with so many gases or pollutants in primitive ages, which was the atmosphere which was clean atmosphere, even then human beings started to use the fire, and forest fires were also there, natural emissions were there from volcanoes. So you can't say that we can get unpolluted air. There are some sort of pollutants or contamination is there in every atmosphere. Only we can differentiate that those remote places okay, they are the background atmosphere which can be seen as baseline data or unpolluted air. Otherwise we can't find in reality absolutely unpolluted air. So the poles or mountains, sea, desert, all these localities or topographies, we imagine that these are unpolluted air, but as a fact of matter, pollution is there also, because of this global circulation of air. One pollutant source can contribute to air quality of other parts also, because pollutants can travel thousands of kilometers. Okay. Even at poles people have found some pollutants the source of which cannot exist at that location. So they are man made pollutants because of emissions from the ships or emissions from industries, and then because of this convection, pollutants go up to stratosphere, then they travel at the upper layers of the troposphere, they go thousands of kilometers in the downwind direction, then they get deposited. So this is the common phenomena. Okay. When we talk about this composition of unpolluted air, so basically you can see this water vapors or some particulate matter suspension may be there, all those kind of things. So they are the part of that composition of so called unpolluted air. Otherwise the gaseous composition, as you already know, that around 78% nitrogen is there in the atmosphere, 21% oxygen, and a very small quantity of carbon dioxide, argon and other gases are there. But still the carbon dioxide is very less in quantity, but this is the greenhouse gas, and climate change related phenomena is associated with this very tiny gas composition of the atmosphere. Okay. So, that is to be kept in mind, that if something is very small in quantity, even then that can create big problem. Okay. We will study like how CFCs that were imagined like wonder chemicals, but that were responsible later on for ozone layer destruction. So, these kind of things happen, and the science gives us the answers, the real answers. Well, then what is the polluted air? Okay. So, polluted air is basically that whatever the natural atmosphere is polluted by unwanted air pollutants or contaminants in huge quantity, which is unbearable to our system, then that is the polluted air, or which is exceeding the permitted quantity of concentration of those pollutants. Okay. And then people talk that contamination and versus pollution is different. Some people say that it is one and same thing. Okay. Some people say no, this is different thing, like contamination is simply the presence of a substance where it should not be there. Okay. And at concentrations which does not harm you, it is bearable in our system, because there is a range of tolerance in our system. Okay. Then the pollution is contamination that results in or can result in adverse biological effects to the residents communities, whether aquatic life, whether planetary life, or whosoever ecosystem, etc. So, those negative impacts or harmful impacts if it can cause, then we say that it is pollution, otherwise it is the contamination simply. So, the pollutants basically they come from atmospheric emissions, or they get transported and they get mixed, and then chemical transformation also occurs when the pollutants transport from one place to another. So, basically those substances and compositions, compounds, interaction of different constituents of the atmosphere with the chemical emissions or those chemicals or compounds. So, those are the basically the pollutants. Okay. When we classify the air pollutants, then we can classify in different ways, like based on the sources we can say the natural pollutants, like due to forest fire, or even plants emit many kind of air pollutants like VOCs, volatile organic compounds. Whenever you are having some smell, that is basically some chemical, that may be a pollutant. Many people are allergic to some sort of smells or those VOCs which are emitted from the plants. And then anthropogenic or man made pollutants may be there because of our human made activities like factories or domestic activities, power plants, transportation sector, all those. Based on origin, we can also call like primary pollutants or secondary pollutants. So, the primary pollutants are those pollutants which are directly emitted, okay, like CO2, greenhouse gas, that is basically, or SO2 or particulate matter, PM10, etc. But secondary pollutants which are formed by primary pollutants by interacting with themselves or by interacting with the constituents of the atmosphere, like ozone. Ozone is not emitted directly by any source. It is not a primary pollutant, it is a secondary pollutant. So, there are many secondary pollutants. Basically, even phase transformation occurs, like SO2 can get converted into SO4, and then it reacts with the particles calcium, magnesium, it can get converted into magnesium sulfate, calcium sulfate. So, from the gas it can be converted into particles. So, phase transformation can also occur. So, those kind of small particles are secondary particles, they are not primary particles. Then when we talk about state of the matter, so the gaseous air pollutants or particulate air pollutants, so that way also even this liquid those droplets are also like mist and in the fog, they are also pollutants. So, the pollutants can be of nature like aerosols or parasols. Parasols means particles plus aerosols. So, the new terminology is there, parasols. Similarly, smog plus fog. So, that is known as the smog, and visibility decreases in the smog. Well, when we talk about sources of air pollutants, so they can be natural sources, as I said, it can be due to volcanic eruptions, it can be due to forest fires or pollens from plants etc. Bacteria may be there from debris or those kind of things, and it can be anthropogenic like industrial fumes or vehicular emissions. So, means sources can be natural as well as this anthropogenic, I would say. So, that means it is not true that only human beings add to the pollutants, even nature adds to the pollutants, right. So, please do not get confused that forests are completely clean, even forests add to the pollutants. Okay. Many VOCs, volatile organic compounds, are emitted by forest, and even in forest you can find some sort of smog because of those VOCs, because VOCs get converted into ozone, and these ozone VOCs etc., the mixture of pollutant, particulate matter etc., they become a kind of smog. So, natural smog may also be there. So, when we talk about scales of air pollution, scales can be like micro scale, meso scale or macro scale. In micro scale, basically like indoor environment or in a vicinity of our existence. Then in meso scale, like local, urban, regional, okay, about 5 kilometer in the local, urban like up to 50 kilometer, even like Delhi's pollution can be urban pollution, you can say. Regional, it can be up to 50 to 500 kilometer. When we talk about macro scale, so the continental or global scale, they are the part of macro scale. So, the micro scale, as I said, indoor air pollution or the dust particles, otherwise they do not travel. Dust particles, these SPM, suspended particulate matters, which are higher in diameter, large size diameters and more mass, they settles down quickly. So, they do not travel, they can't be part of longer scales. So, they are part of the micro scale. But in meso scale, photochemical smog is there, acid rain related, visibility related phenomena or exposure to traffic emissions, those kind of there. So, that is part of the meso scale. In macro scale, like ozone depletion, greenhouse gas emissions or global warming phenomena, they are the part of macro scale related pollution problems. So, when we talk about the local phenomena, then it is characterized by one or several large emitters or a large number of relatively small emitters, though in a collective way they can contribute to the local air pollution problem. And the examples are because of like carbon monoxide emitted from a motor vehicle, and carbon monoxide can get converted into CO2. So, for like in regional related problem, it may not be a big part in that sense. And the waste treatment ponds, they also emit those pollutants that become the local phenomena of pollution. So, they affects the accidental release which confined to the local scale. So, those are the part of local scale air pollution problem. When we talk about urban scale air pollution, so basically these are two types like primary pollutants and then the formation of secondary pollutant that become part of the urban air pollution. And the tropospheric ozone is the dominated urban problem because of those precursors of ozone are present there. Precursors are those pollutants which participate into producing of ozone, that chemical reaction, photochemical reaction, and formation of secondary pollutants also occur. Examples are photochemical reactions of oxides of nitrogen and hydrocarbons, they convert into ozone. So, that is the example of urban scale problem. Then when we talk about the regional scale problem, then these urban oxidants and then the release of other primary air pollutants like SO2, they get converted into SO3, and then visibility get reduced. So, those are the regional scale air pollution problems. When we talk about the continental, then the pollution problems are related like acid rain. So, in Germany black forest was very much damaged by acid rain, and the scientists, researchers found that the source of those pollutants were from Great Britain. So, then this international treaties are signed and those power plants were tackled with cleaner fuel or technological solutions were provided, and later on this black forest was revived. So, those kind of acid rain is part of regional scale problem or even continental scale problem. Global scale problem, as we know that this global warming or these volcanic eruptions related, they contribute into those kind of problems like climate change. So, the role of atmosphere in terms of source and sink relationship when we talk, so wherever emissions occur, they are the sources basically, okay, and then the dispersion occurs or transformation, chemical transformation may occur, then the removal, settling, that dry deposition or wet deposition occurs, and the receptor response means whenever exposure is there to a human being or the animal or the ecosystem or property whatever, that is the receptor where they get exposed, and then these chemical reactions may occur negatively. So, the sources and sinks are basically, you can see these are the sources and these are the sinks or the receptors, and where pollution get absorbed and they can get converted into some sort of problem. So, the receptor is nothing but something which is adversely affected by polluted air. So, it can be human being, it can be some plants or agriculture farms or forest area or animals, it can be also buildings and these monuments, because of this abrasion and those kind of acid rain etc., these monuments get damaged because of air pollutant. When we talk about different processes and fate of the air pollutant, so this pictorial representation demonstrate in a or illustrate in a nice way. So, like emission is there from the stack and the wind is blowing in that direction. So, the diffusion and dispersion is occurring, okay, molecular phenomena diffusion and more physical phenomena of dispersion with the air, and then it can happen dry deposition or it can happen wet deposition because of precipitation that can happen. So, the diffusion, transport and dispersion, all these three phenomena decide the fate of the air pollutants, where it will get deposited, where it will go up to what distances in the downwind direction it will travel and exposed to the receptors. So, in transport phenomena you can see it can this source receptor relationship, this is the smelter which is the source, and this is some whether hotel or some house where it goes in some concentration. There are ways to calculate how much concentration will be contributed by this particular source. We will see that later on. So, that is the relationship of and contribution of the transport in the source receptor relationship. And the diffusion and dispersion, as this diffusion is mixing of because of turbulence and molecular diffusion, and the dispersion is basically it can travel with the air and larger eddies of the air etc. So, this happens diffusion and dispersion takes together toll to the air pollutants, and that is why the size of plume increases because of those eddies of the air etc. And then they also get deposited or comes down to the surface of the earth. So, high stacks are there, then less amount of pollutants come to the surface, that is why these high stacks help in dispersion. Otherwise, there are other uses of the stacks we will see later on. So, in conclusion we can say that the atmosphere plays very important role in transforming the fate of the pollutants from its source when it travels to the sink or the receptor. And the unpolluted air, it is a concept and it is merely a benchmark to see the baseline kind of scenario, otherwise it is very difficult to find the unpolluted spot at the earth. And the spheres of air pollution exist at all scales, from micro scale to the global scale. It can be a different kind of problems, as you see indoor air pollution to the global warming or climate change related issues are there. So, these these two introductory lectures set the kind of way forward for this air pollution and control course for you. So, a kind of visualization may be there in your mind, so that what is the real problem related to air pollution. So, slowly now we will go in detail, like in next lecture we will see its impacts, negative impacts on the health or the eco environment, all those things. So, these are the references which you can go through to get more information. Thank you for your kind attention. See you in the next lecture. Thanks again.